Hey, welcome to My Kind of Place, a series where I look at some of my favourite areas and sections from video games. In this episode, I'm going to be focusing on the sewers from The Last of Us' 6th chapter, The Suburbs. I'll be shining a light on the story of Ish and the tragedy of the sewer camp. Keeping the explanation of The Last of Us short and sweet, it's a narrative-driven third-person adventure game released in 2013. Set in a post-apocalyptic world ravaged by a mutated strain of cordyceps, a contagious parthenogenic fungus rendering those afflicted by it into a zombie-like state, civilization as we know it is dead. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there, guys, and it's looking a bit grim for us humans. Since the focus of this episode is the side story of Ish and the survivors that made up the sewer camp, you can expect little spoilers from the main plot of this game. Ellie and Joel's personal narratives take a back seat during this section, as we uncover just one of the heartbreaking stories that has happened in a world that is honestly just filled with them. We come across the first piece of Ish's story while exploring the beach at the start of the chapter. In a dilapidated boat, we find a note written by him on a scrap of paper. During the early stages of the pandemic, Ish took his boat out to sea. He stayed out there alone for as long as he could, but eventually, the time came where his boat was no longer seaworthy, and he ran low of supplies. He was then forced to return to land, to whatever remained. Two parts of his note really stand out to me. The polite, almost humorous comment of, "If you happen to find my skeleton, please don't step on my skull. Thanks." It feels almost laughably absurd, but it's really not too far-fetched. And the second part that stands out is, what could possibly go wrong? Right? Because those choice of words are so unfortunate in retrospect, once we uncover more of his story. From there, the group finds an entrance to the sewers, where the vast majority of Ish's story takes place. Our initial impression of the sewers is, well, they're sewers. They're dark, wet and unpleasant, only made worse by the years of neglect they've suffered. Not to mention they're filled with rats, roaches and other nasties. It's only when we find Ish's second note that it even occurs to us that someone may have chosen to live down here. Ish makes good points about the sewers being easy to defend and possibly a good place to stay until everything topside gets sorted. As he notes, infected and non-infected alike are constantly trying to kill you. Things are bad, and survival is extremely hard, especially for someone by themselves. We find the third note from Ish in a locked room whilst trying to find a way for Ellie to cross the flooded tunnel. The note details how Ish had come across a group of survivors who didn't immediately shoot him on sight. They simply traded with him. They seemed decent. He even makes a note of the fact that they had some children with them who seemed pretty scared. The note ends with him deciding to tell the group about the sewers, partly because they're safe and partly because he's lonely. Whilst we don't yet know the outcome of this choice, it's concerning, to say the least. You see, to even get to that note, we had to deal with two lurking clickers that were locked in the room with it. Although these infected are easily dealt with, it's what it implies that is so much more troubling. At some point in time, infected found their way into the sewers. The sewers became compromised, unsafe. The player is then left with two questions. One, did the group choose to join Ish? And two, when did the sewers become compromised? The answer to each of these questions being incredibly important due to possible ramifications. And these questions are answered quickly once we get back to Ellie and the others. Just around the corner, and past the bends, it stands in stark contrast to the gloom. A doorway to a castle, an attempt at making the situation the children faced more pleasant and palatable. They did join him. Whilst the group and even the player may be unsettled by the castle, it was never intended to be creepy. It does feel a bit like a mural in a children's hospital though, a way to help settle the kids down and make a somewhat unpleasant experience slightly better. After the doors are opened and the sound alarm tripped, it becomes very apparent that this place has been long since abandoned. From here on, you discover how these people lived down here, and you start to notice just how focused they were on trying to keep the children safe and as happy as possible, even if their attempts end up being a little sad. There's goalposts and toys. The camp rules are worded for children and referred to as house rules to make the camp seem more homely and friendly. They even allow the kids to play so long as they aren't too loud. It becomes very clear that the adults in this group still wanted the kids to remain as kids despite all the chaos, which is what makes the groans of the infected emanated from the next area all the more disheartening. Once you open the lock gate, you're attacked by a group of infected. This solidifies what happened to the camp, especially as there was a clicker among them. Clickers only occur in the late stages of the infection. Exploring the new area, you discover further house rules to protect those living down here. They're pretty logical, and again, they're simplified for children. In the room opposite the house rule sign, you find an area for washing and drying clothes. A nice touch is the washing line hanging under a grate, which would have been one of the few spots down here to see, well, any actual sunlight. From Ish's fourth note, by the contraption against the wall, we find out that these barrels and pipes serve as a system for capturing rainwater from the grate above. It means that survivors didn't have to leave the safety of the sewers to gather any water, which, as he notes, is a great idea. There's almost a sense of normality to the note. He uses smileys, refers to the group having dinner together that night, and even gave the kids a couple of water guns to play with. They have enough water that the kids can waste some having a water fight. Things seem to be going well. The camp is about as nice as it possibly could be, and they seem happy. Yet somehow, this camp still failed, and you can't escape that fact. There are even two bodies in the very same room as this note. The moment that struck me the most during this section, the part that really broke my heart and affected me, is just a little further along, in a seemingly innocuous room. It's hidden a little way in, so you don't see it immediately when you first open the door, but there's a message written on the floor. They didn't suffer. You pan the camera up, and there's a number of cloth-wrapped bodies that are honestly just far too small next to the body of an adult, surrounded by drawings and toys. There's no music other than ambience, and none of the other characters enter the room or even comment on what you've just stumbled across. You're just kind of stuck in a silence, trying to process it. You go and you pick up the note next to the adult just to find out what happened. Kyle was trapped in here with some of the children, infected, banging on the door, and cut off from any of the surviving members of the camp. In an act of desperation, he chose the lesser of two evils in his eyes. Becoming infected for many people in The Last of Us's world is the worst thing that can happen. It is a horrendous process and people's biggest fear. We don't actually know how he chose to end things, but the bottle of tablets next to him may give a slight hint to at least the method he chose for himself. And just because I really need to mention this because it, to be honest, bothers me a lot, although this is a good method of implied storytelling through the game's environments and assets, the fact that you can pick up and use those very same tablets to upgrade your in-game stats is perhaps a little in bad taste and short-sighted. Yeah. In response to the note and everything he's just discovered, the only thing Joel can say is,
Jesus.
And then you move on. Probably a little slower if you're anything like me, still trying to comprehend what you've just found. Dejected. But you don't even get that much time to process things, because shortly afterwards you accidentally trigger a safety gate, splitting the group into two. Joel and Sam on one side and Ellie and Henry on the other. Infected swarming towards you due to the noise. After dealing with all the infected in the area, the player can explore the main part of the camp's living quarters. Exploring these quarters makes you realize just how many people lived here and the amount of effort they went through to get these facilities and items into the sewers. There's at least half a dozen beds, tons of personal items, a kitchen, portable toilets, and actual showers. There's another rain catcher system in an area called the Drinking Water Distribution Center. They even had cages and food so that they could keep livestock in the form of pigs and chickens. This was an incredibly well thought out and maintained settlement, all collaborating together to get by whilst following simple rules and organization. We're still left with so many questions about just what exactly happened to them. Shortly before you leave, you pass through what is essentially a classroom and play area, filled with toys, learning resources, books, and even a whiteboard. The adults of this group spent time and risked a lot just to bring down these unessential items specifically for the children. They were really trying to do the best they could for these kids, putting them first. Zombie and post-apocalyptic media tends to depict humanity unfavorably. Usually, humans are depicted as being the real monsters of the story. We do terrible things, and we're trash. So to see a group that is so good, well-intentioned and pure fail feels so unjust. It's just not fair. And I think it's best summed up by what Joel says in response to this comment by Sam.
Look at this place. It's like a classroom. Why couldn't they keep it safe?
Son, I wish I knew. God knows they didn't deserve it.
Joel and Sam regroup with Henry and Ellie, and they scramble to make their way out of the infested sewers. Once they exit, in a cruel twist of irony, they find this message written on the wall. Even when the settlement was lost, Ish and the remaining survivors blocked the door and wrote a warning to protect any of us from entering the sewers. It was just poor, dumb luck that Joel and crew entered from the wrong side. Despite everything, his group's intentions were still good. They were still trying to look out for others. There are 2 further notes to be found above ground in the suburbs. One from Kyle, whose body we found back in the sewers, and a final note from Ish. Kyle's note details how bad things were topside before Ish approached him about moving his family into the sewer hideout, whilst Ish's final note reveals just what exactly happened to the camp, and the aftermath of it. One simple, small mistake. A terrible error of an unlocked door destroyed everything. The tragic failure of the camp through a slip-up is such a bitter pill to swallow. The group seemed so well-meaning and caring. They were a beacon of goodness in a sea of despair, mostly uncorrupted by a world falling apart around them. One of the few examples of still decent people just trying to get by. The optimism of Ish, his group, and the initial success of the camp makes it so harrowing. Ish ends a note completely broken as a person, wanting to give up but ultimately continuing to keep faith in humanity. Despite everything, in a world so awful, he still believes in goodness and compassion. We never find out anything else about him or the remaining members of his group. A note from Ish was going to be placed in the Colorado Mall during the Left Behind DLC, but it was rightly cut after it was deemed to be too coincidental by the devs. The sewers and the story of Ish are phenomenal examples of environmental storytelling implemented effectively. A poignant and memorable story told through well-placed assets and a few notes, featuring characters we never even meet or hear. We don't even know when these events happened. They could have happened last year or a decade ago. The camp is a time capsule, a snapshot into the lives of these individuals that we just happen to stumble across by accident. Regardless of your opinion of The Last of Us and Naughty Dog games in general, praise needs to be given to them for their world-building and environmental storytelling, because it is excellent. It's how you do it well, and it should be taken note of. The overall quality of their games, especially when it comes to their visuals, animation, narratives, and acting, are generally praised, but I see slightly less of a focus on this particular aspect. It fleshes out a game's world and allows players to engage with it in greater depth. Even now, after 7 years, I'm still captivated by the story that Naughty Dog was able to tell throughout this chapter. When I think about environmental storytelling in video games, I often find myself coming back to the tragedy of Ish, purely due to my admiration of it, which, if anything, is the best testament of just how successful it was as a story.